Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Michael Brown, and you are listening to 3 Words, a bite-sized podcast about the simple and strategic choices that all of us can make in order to feel fully alive. And even during those times when you're feeling sad or emotionally down, or even as we talk about in today's episode, depressed. I'm here with my son, Dr. Justin Brown, who is obviously a doctor and a specialist and an expert in this realm of emotional well-being. And so our 3 words today are train your emotions. And as I listen to my son, not only did he offer advice and expertise and some really cool strategies to being able to lift your mood and to take you from a place of emotional challenge and difficulty to a place of emotional well-being and even the feeling of happiness, he shares his own story. He gets vulnerable and transparent and honest with his father, as well as with our viewers and listeners, about even how he has had to apply these very principles to his life in the last few days and weeks. It's a heartwarming episode. And I think you'll really find it meaningful personally and to those whom you love who are struggling during this time in our lives. Listen in now. So Justin, as my oldest son, and obviously a doctor, it's really cool to have you in the podcast studio again because you bring very unique insights and expertise to a lot of our conversations. So today's conversation is around these 3 words.
Train your emotions.
Train your emotions. Well, as you know, we talk a lot about the 12 dimensions of a person's life. And one of those dimensions is the emotional dimension. So I'm guessing we're going to frame a lot of our conversation within that dimension today. So why did you choose these 3 words?
Yeah. So I love that we get to talk about, in particular, health and mental health. And we've done that in a few episodes so far. Address your addiction, stop weighing yourself. And now we're coming back with a conversation actually that was rooted in a therapy for depression. So This whole conversation is kind of related to this therapy method called behavioral activation. And I think it's unique because it also can be talked about with kind of a life coaching twist. So I look forward to being able to engage this as far as talking about how do we address emotions and take steps towards changing and training our emotions when we're struggling with our emotions, but also how do we address lack of motivation.
Okay.
So that's the conversation today.
Ooh, I'm excited because obviously when I talk about the emotional dimension, I'm usually framing it within how do I manage and express a wide variety of emotions across the emotional spectrum. And I like how you're going to kind of include this idea of training them and then also including motivation. Let's go.
Sure. So let's start a little bit and talk about depression.
Okay.
Which is kind of where this idea of, it's called behavioral activation, where behavioral activation is used is in treatment for depression. So depression is a medical condition that is characterized by and defined by generally feeling down, but also an inability to enjoy the things that one would normally enjoy. And depression is very common. As many as 10% of Americans in a given year experience depression or a major depressive episode or major depressive disorder. And about 20% of Americans as well in their lifetime will experience and meet criteria for this medical diagnosis of depression.
That is so sad.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think one of the most difficult things about depression as a medical diagnosis and just a reality for so many people is that it's a cycle. When one is feeling down and depressed, they may not enjoy the things that they would normally enjoy as much. So they begin avoidance of those activities that they would normally enjoy. If I'm feeling down and depressed and I love to read books or listen to music, I'm actually going to stop doing those things. I'm going to stop engaging my friendships because I don't feel the joy and pleasure that I would feel from those normally. And then as I pull away from those enjoyable activities, then there's feeding into this cycle of, well, now I feel even less joy in my life. As we dive even deeper into the depths of depression of, now I don't want to get out of bed because I'm stressed out. I am feeling guilty. I'm feeling hopeless. And as we sleep in all day, as we're not eating as much, as we are avoiding these important relationships, as we're questioning the meaning and the value and the purpose of life, then we're pulling away from these important and meaningful and pleasurable activities. And it's this cycle of now the responsibilities are building up, and now I'm fatigued, and now I'm having poor sleep behaviors, and it deepens and deepens and deepens through this cycle and this spiral of depression.
I'm going to take this moment to pause because we've said a lot already, and it's appropriate, I think, to invite all of you to share this particular episode on emotional well-being with a friend or a family member who could really use it, and even subscribe to our podcast. Now back to our episode. But if you're feeling that, it's hard to just decide, I'm not going to feel that anymore. I'm going to overcome that and get out of bed or begin to read. Like, there's got to be a strategy in place to be able to kind of work through those things.
Absolutely. So that is actually what this concept of behavioral activation is.
Okay.
So depression is treated in two major ways. It's with medications, therapy, or a combination of both. And the combination of both is the one that the evidence shows is most effective. The type of therapy we use is called cognitive behavioral therapy, where it's really focusing on what are the negative self-talk, what are the negative thoughts that are contributing to this depression and to this medical but also emotional state. And how can we address and change and train ourselves and adjust some of those things? So within cognitive behavioral therapy, there's this idea of behavioral activation, where I would say, I am feeling down. I'm feeling depressed. But even though I'm feeling down, I'm going to do the activities that I would normally do when I'm happy. And in doing those activities, it will actually, the neurochemistry in my brain will make myself become happy.
Wow. Okay.
And it's not this way of minimizing our emotions or ignoring our emotions. It feels almost a little bit like, oh, I'm just going to fake being happy. But actually, in the same way that if I listen to a sad song or I watch a sad movie, that I empathize and I begin to experience those emotions because of the way that our brain connects with specific activities and environments and contexts, that when we create those environments and those contexts that we would normally do when we have uplifting and positive emotions, that it could actually pull us out of our negative emotional state and train our emotions to be the more positive emotions that we are searching for and needing to get out of that cycle of depression.
So the medical research and the science promotes the very things that you and I and our DMB coaching team and our podcast guests are always talking about, in that we can make the next best choice. And the outcome of that, or the overflow of that, or the after effect of that, will be feeling more alive, feeling better, feeling more whole, and, to use your term, feeling happier.
Totally.
So this actually underscores the very thing through a medical science lens that we've been talking about a lot.
Yeah. And I think what is so empowering and freeing even about this concept of behavioral activation is that if I'm feeling down and depressed, I don't need to wait until I'm feeling better. I don't need to wait to feel normal again before I start doing the things that I would normally do. And I can't choose the fact that I'm feeling really sad right now, that I can't choose those scenarios and those circumstances that have brought me and my neurochemistry of my mind to just feel down. But what I can do is I can take steps and I can make choices today that even if I'm not feeling like, gosh, I really don't want to get out of bed today, I can choose to, you know what? I don't want to do this, but it's the healthy thing for me to do. And it is the thing that I would do if I were happy. Right. And it will actually make me happy. Maybe not today, but a week from now, 2 weeks from now, as I continue to do those things that are normally pleasurable for me, I can begin to experience that joy in life yet again.
Well, and this principle applies everywhere. So maybe I'm not in a place where I'm feeling depressed, but maybe I'm feeling a lack of motivation, or maybe I'm feeling like, honestly, I just don't want to.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I just don't feel like it. I can actually choose my way into feeling. Similarly, I share often that I can't help what I'm feeling today. What I feel today is what I feel today. But while I cannot choose my feelings, I can choose my attitude. That attitude is different than feelings. But then you're taking it another step further. I can make choices despite my feelings that actually will create an enhancement of positive emotional feelings.
Definitely. And I think too that when it comes to, you talk a lot about motivation. And as a life coach, you can inspire, but you can't actually motivate others to do something. And I love what you have to say about motivation, Dad, where you talk about motivation as this thing that if we're waiting for us to be motivated, then we very well may never do the healthy things, the good things
Right.
that we would do if we were feeling motivated.
I recently heard it said that, and I didn't say it, I picked it up somewhere and I can't remember exactly the source, but treat motivation like you would someone who's late to dinner. Start without them. And this idea that you can make a choice and then the motivation might come later. It might be present at that same time. Just yesterday morning, I received a text message from an individual that said this: Dr. Brown, I woke up this morning knowing I should go to the gym, but I don't feel motivated to do so. What do I do about that?
What'd you tell them?
Well, what was interesting is I had not an opportunity to respond. Because I was speaking at another conference. But then what happened is I went down and the first floor of this conference center, and in line at that Starbucks was that individual. And I had the opportunity to actually engage in a conversation with him and said, you go and do it anyways. Yes. And he said, that's exactly what I did. I said, so how are you feeling now?
Yeah.
And he said, I feel much better. So I always like to describe motivation as it's wonderful when it's there, but don't wait for it and don't expect it.
It's not necessary. And it oftentimes in the context of depression, but also in the context of motivation and lack of motivation, we don't have to wait for that to come, and we can actually choose to create more of that. That if I am that 5 a.m. alarm, when I had plans last night, I was going to work out at 5 a.m. today, I can say, I'm not feeling it today, but I'm going to do it anyways. And it might be really hard, that first 5 a.m. alarm, to go get on my gym shorts and go down to my basement and hop on my Peloton. I can actually, it's going to be difficult, perhaps. But once I'm on that exercise bike, or once I'm lifting those weights, it's not as hard.
I like how you frame that, because you actually are honoring, like you said, you honor the emotions.
Yes.
You're not trying to stuff them. You're not trying to ignore them or dispel them. You're acknowledging them. This is hard.
Yeah.
This is frustrating. This feels scary. This feels whatever, fill in the blank, but I'm going to do it anyways. I'm guessing, son, in your work with clients and obviously even in medicine now as a doctor in residency, there's times where people say, but it's not that easy. It's so hard. Like, it sounds easy. We'll do it anyways. Yeah. But do you ever find that there's people who say, it's just too hard to do it anyways?
Here's the beauty of it, is that as we do it even once, the next time becomes easier. And I think so it is with this emotional context of depression and anxiety and other mental health disorders, that as we take that first step, the first time that we do that thing that we wish felt pleasurable, we wish we felt motivated for, but we don't feel it. Our emotions haven't caught up to that activity and to what our body is doing. The next time it gets easier, and the next time it gets easier, and the accumulation of those healthy choices will make us healthier. And it is a remarkably effective treatment for depression, but I think it's also an effective treatment for the lack of motivation that so many of us often feel. That as I do things, as I empower myself, as I say, I'm going to do this thing that I'm not motivated to do, even though I don't feel that way. It's almost like a challenge in a game of like,
yes,
I don't feel motivated, so I'm going to do the thing. Not in spite of, but almost it can motivate us even more, that I'm going to do a hard thing that I don't feel motivated to do, and I'm going to do it anyways because I don't feel motivated and because I want to battle and fight against that.
Which is why I like the word that you chose. The active word is train, because we all understand what training is. We train so as to produce, and like training isn't the game. If you're training for a sport, that's not the game.
Right.
It's preparation for the game.
Sure.
If you're training for a career change, that's not the career. It's the training and preparation for the career. That the very word train presumes that I'm practicing.
Right.
That I'm learning, I'm growing, which means that I'm probably going to do some things that aren't the best.
Right.
There's times I'm going to make mistakes. It's not always going to go well, which I'm guessing you leave room for that in your description of this strategy.
Yeah.
That you can actually, some days will go better than others.
Yeah.
Some days will feel easier than others. Some days you're like, wow, that was successful. And then another day it's like, wow, that bombed.
Right.
But part of it, and there's actually 2 other episodes when 3 Words podcast that are coming to mind as you're having this conversation with me. One is do it now. Don't wait to start that great thing until you feel it. Do it now. And then the second episode that comes to mind that we've obviously previously aired is never give up. See, so often we start something, but then it doesn't work in 3 days.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't work in 7 days. So
Right.
we're like, this isn't working. We need more time.
Yeah.
So do it now.
Yeah.
And never give up.
Thank you for that.
And you're promising. And I think the promise is sincere. And it's substantiated by science and research
Yeah.
that as you make these choices, you will begin to feel better.
Yeah. I want to pivot our conversation to take a more personal direction.
Okay.
So I initiated these 3 words with you quite some time ago, and I've been thinking about them as I've become aware of this particular methodology in depression. But I don't think I realized when I posed this idea and proposed these 3 words at the time that I actually would find myself in a place where I was feeling more frequently down. And we haven't talked about this. I was waiting for this conversation to do it organically, but I have found myself over these past few weeks struggling with this mood that is of a lower quality than I would normally want to be the case for my life. And it's hard to pinpoint what is the cause of this. Is it the colder weather? Is it the lack of sunshine? Is it the longer hours? Maybe it's working in the context of an underappreciated profession in healthcare in the context of a global pandemic. Maybe it's insecurity about my inability to care for patients in the way that I want for them to be cared for. Maybe it's the lack of time and margin and some of these work-life balance that I'm trying to build into. But I find myself recently and at times struggling with, I feel sad today and I don't know why. And I'm trying to do things that are my normal things, but I don't have the energy and I don't want to do those things. So specifically as I've thought about this behavioral activation methodology and this practice, the 2 things that I feel like for me are those things that even when I don't feel like it, that I've identified, these have to be essential for me in my well-being, is that even if I'm not feeling it every day, I want to do some physical activity. I know it's healthy for me, physically, but also emotionally. And secondly, is to engage in some of those meditative and reflective spiritual practices and rhythms that those are the things that even if in the moment it's hard to work out, it's hard to say, I'm going to turn down the music on this drive, or I'm going to turn off this podcast and I'm going to pray. I'm going to reflect and think and listen. That those are actually the things that as I've been wrestling this low mood, this struggling to feel as much joy in life, maybe as I've been wanting to recently, that I can choose to make those things essential and say, I'm not going to compromise these things for the sake of, as I continue to do those things, that it will make me more whole and it will make me more alive, even if it takes a little longer for my emotions to catch up to what my body is doing.
I appreciate your transparency, son, in sharing those things. Obviously, we're talking about them for the first time here on camera, but I think it's also really good for our viewers and listeners who know us personally, but also maybe are connected to our family or have even heard us speak at conferences or been coached by us, to realize that the things that we talk about, we have to apply in our own lives as well. Right. I think, in fact, recently someone said to me, it seems so easy for you to live these things out. And I can't imagine you ever struggling. And I never want to promote that idea or even present that to our viewers or listeners, that even as life coaches, even as doctors and therapists and counselors and so forth, like we have to look in the mirror every single day and apply these same principles. Son, there's days I wake up, I don't feel like doing certain things.
Yeah.
And there's days I wake up that I'm not wanting to follow through with the plan, which is one of the reasons that, episode 71, I design my days because I have to put into place the choices and the rhythms and the routines, knowing full well that there's going to be days or hours where I'm like, I'm not wanting to do that. I'm not feeling it.
Yeah.
And again, so often, if we go even back to the very first episode of 3 Words Podcast, the very first 3 words was delay immediate gratification. It is so hard for me. It is so hard for you. Everyone I interact with, it is hard to do the hard thing when we're not feeling it. Or phrase this way, it's hard to do the hard thing when life is hard.
Yeah.
But yet it's the very thing, as you said, the essential thing. So I'm guessing that's your challenge for our viewers and our listeners today as you wrap up is what are those essential building blocks?
Of course.
Would you have the final word and share with our viewers and listeners? Okay.
So as I turn to our audience, those who are listening and viewing us today, what is it that is essential for you in your life, for your well-being? What is it essential for you to do every day and every week for you to be well, even when you don't feel like it? What does it look like to make a list of those activities that you consider most pleasurable? What does it look like to have an activity menu that when you're feeling down, when you're feeling depressed, when you're not experiencing as much joy as you once used to, that you can look through that menu and say, I'm going to do this today, even though I don't feel it. And I will trust that the accumulation of that choice will help me to feel better. I would encourage our viewers to when you've done something hard, to reward yourself with a simple pleasure, whether it's a little piece of chocolate or a nice cup of coffee with a little extra creamer, a phone call to a friend, a few pages read of a book. I would encourage our viewers that they would talk to their friends and family and say, I'm feeling down. I'm feeling unmotivated. Here are the things that I'm doing to address that. And finally, I would encourage our viewers that as they're engaging in these types of conversations and wrestling with these various challenges in the emotional as well as other dimensions of life, that they would even talk to a medical professional, a healthcare provider, or a mental health specialist to help them to do these things well. But for all of us, that even when it's hard, each of us have the power and the ability to train our emotions.
For life coaching, consulting services, or to hire a keynote speaker, please visit dmbcoaching.com.